Hey to all Metal Maniacs, welcome to another episode on Iron Horde channel. As you have possibly followed me during these last weeks, I've been doing videos detailing information and essential albums from different areas from around the world, concentrating on the 80s decade. But I'm going to make an exception for this week's video because I'm going to tackle one of my favorite bands and ranking the albums of this band. The band in question is Manilla Road, an epic metal landmark band, one of the top bands within that subgenre, one of my all-time favorite bands, a band that gives me a reason to live, to listen to their music over and over and over again as much as possible. So without losing any more time, let's go straight to the albums and straight to the video. Up the hammers. Thank you for joining us again for this video. Our job here is to review albums, suggest bands, review festivals, speak about cultural aspects of heavy metal. So if that is something of interest to you, please consider subscribing, sharing this video with your friends, clicking on the like button, on the bell so you are notified whenever we release a new video. So as I said, this video is dedicated to the great band that is Manilla Road, to the memory also of the main man behind the band, Mark Shelton, rock in peace, a great musician, and hopefully this video, along with other videos on YouTube which I have followed during the years, will make justice with the greatness of this musician and this individual in general, because he was one of the nicest persons you could meet within the metal scene in general. As I said, Manilla Road are synonymous with epic metal, a band founded in 1977 for a grand total of 18 full-length albums. Releasing 18 albums is not an easy feat, but the biggest thing about Manilla Road is not the quantity but the quality in this music. The band threaded for most of it, if not all of its career, beneath the radar of the mainstream attention, but nonetheless they kept going on with what they believed in, with their sound, with their music, making no compromises. And with the advent then of the internet in the early 2000s, the fan base started growing and Manilla Road started being invited back again to some of the major festivals in the underground scene, and their fan base grew slowly but constantly. As I said, and I want to reiterate here, Manilla Road gave no regards to fashion, to trends, which are quite common in every aspect of our lives, let alone in heavy metal, but yet they kept on going, and with these choices they made, they might not have gathered a wider audience, but the fans that they had and still have are one of the most dedicated group of fans of any band around, because they admire the resolute approach of the bands and of Mark Shelton in keeping true to their own beliefs and their own music without bending to any requests. Even though the band reached a cult status in the underground scene in the last 20 years or so, the members of the band and Mark Shelton himself remained very much down to earth. As I said, one of the most approachable guys you would have ever met. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. If there was one musician who could have had a rockstar attitude, Mark Shelton would have been the one exception, or one of the few exceptions, because he was really truly an inspiration in his music for everyone. But notwithstanding all this, he was one of us. We had the band in Malta for one of the auditions of the Malta Doom Metal Festival. I went with the band to a local TV station, we laughed and we joked on our way there, and you can find this interview online on YouTube. After that we went to the venue for the event. It was a great show. It was a weekend for me to remember, especially now that Mark Shelton is not with us anymore, and I will cherish those moments and the conversations I had with Mark and even the rest of the band very close to my heart. But enough with the introductions, let's go straight to the albums, because we have 18 albums to rank, so it's quite a long trip. Keep in mind, obviously, that this is a very subjective choice. Everyone has his own preferences with regards to these albums, so go ahead and write in the comments your preferred, your least preferred albums from the band. Maybe rank them all, like I'm going to do, and let's start a conversation about this great band and keep the name alive as much as possible. Album number 18 is To Kill a King, released in 2017 with Golden Core Records. And you know, a band is great when even your least favorite album from their discography is still such a good album. The self-titled track, the track Ghost Warriors, the track The Talisman are all great tracks. There's also a bit of a darker feel on this record. I think what it lacks in general is the epic parts, which are so synonymous with Manilla Road music. Album number 17 is the album The Circus Maximus, released in 1992 with Black Dragon Records. This is quite an odd vinyl also, because the cover art is like this, but it opens like this, so I have to keep it this way. But obviously if you had to open this like this, it would make more sense. But anyway, it's a great cover art as well. This is debatable if it is actually a Manilla Road album, because it was supposed to be released as a side project by Mark Shelton with two other musicians, but the label wanted to release this under the name of Manilla Road. It isn't a bad album, it's just the sound is different from what we associate with Manilla Road, and that's why it is always at the end of the lists, because if you want to listen to Manilla Road, you want to listen to music which is synonymous with the sound of Manilla Road. The best tracks on here are Throne of Blood, Murder by Degrees, and No Sign From Above. And two of these three tracks have Mark Shelton's vocals, because here the vocals alternate through the three musicians involved on this record. It has a kind of also a bit of a progressive touch as well. That's why it isn't that kind of Manilla Road sounding album, but it isn't bad. So although it's on the end of the list, I think it deserves also a listen every now and then. Album number 16 is the album Mysterium, released in 2013 with Shadow Kingdom Records. Same reasoning behind this album, same as the previous album, To Kill a King, with the difference that the standout tracks on here I feel are much better than on the album To Kill a King actually. Example, the track The Grey God Passes with its exceptional guitar solo, the track Stand Your Ground, and the track Only the Brave are those standout tracks for me on this record. Love the cover art on here, it's one of my favorite from all the discography of Manilla Road. The theme behind the album is about the explorer Ludwig Leichhardt's last expedition in Australia in 1848, from which he has mysteriously disappeared. And that is a perfect theme for such an album and the music, the style of music of Manilla Road. Album number 15, Playground of the Damned, released in 2011 by Shadow Kingdom Records. This album very much takes the sound of Manilla Road back to the epic metal sound, as you will hear in later albums that I will mention. Manilla Road sound during the years has had different styles, remaining mainly on the epic metal, but there are different aspects which differ from one period to another. Even though it is in my bottom choices from this list, but yet this is an album which is above average with excellent tracks throughout the whole record. The problem though with this record is that none of these tracks kind of excel, none of them stand out. You won't find yourself, at least for my perspective, going back to these tracks and listening them over and over again. But as a whole album and as one listen, it is a very good record as well. Maybe I can make an exception for one standout track, which is Brethren of the Hammer. Now as we move along, the choices start getting a bit more difficult, even at this stage, let alone when we reach the top tier of albums. Album number 14 is Invasion, released in 1980 by Roadster Records. This is the first Manilla Road album. The sound on here is kind of space psychedelic rock style. It isn't the sound that we are accustomed with Manilla Road. If I remember correctly, in one of the interviews, Mark Shelton said that he had promoted this album with some labels. He received an offer from one of the labels, but with the condition that they would change some things in the sound on this album, and obviously Mark Shelton scrapped that idea, and not only that, he decided to open up his own label, Roadster Records, and release his album with that label. Talk about no compromise. Far Side of the Sun, The Dream Goes On are great proto-metal tracks, but the track that stands out here is the track The Empire, which gives us hints of what the sound of Manilla Road would later become, that epic sound, that majestic kind of approach to music. Album number 13, the follow-up to Invasion, which is this album Metal, released in 1982, again with Roadster Records. I said this is the follow-up, but in reality between Invasion and Metal there is one album which was released later, which I will come back to it later on in this video. So this might be the second, but might be also regarded as the third album by Manilla Road. Still retains that hard rock, psychedelic space rock feel, but the tracks on here are a bit heavier. Again, it's a step-by-step transition towards the epic sound of later albums. My favorite tracks on this album are Cage of Mirrors and Queen of the Black Coast. Throughout this album I feel a vibe of kind of 70s Judas Priest, especially Stained Class era. The warmer production, the kind of playing, it reminds me a lot of that period of Judas Priest. Album number 12 is the album Mark of the Beast, released in 2002 with Monster Records. And this album is the one that was actually written in 1981 but got shelved by the band and not released obviously until 2002. So it still retains that hard rock feel, that psychedelic feel like the albums Invasion and Metal, but I really love the tracks on this album. I think it's more a consistent album than the other two which are similar to this. This album was actually going to be named Dreams of Ashkaton, but later the title was changed to Mark of the Beast. The heavier tracks like Black Lotus and Triumvirate really stand out on this album. They are so heavy considering when they were written as well. Some quality space rock tracks like Venusian Sea, Time Trap and the title track as well stand out. So all in all, this is a very consistent album, and I think most of the time it's quite underrated as well. Album number 11, Blessed Cursed, released in 2015 with Golden Core Records. Possibly the longest Manilla Road album, almost 100 minutes long. But all in all, it's a very good album with tracks such as the title track, The Dead Still Speak, Falling, Reign of Dreams are such good tracks in here. Maybe the album could have been trimmed a bit to make it a bit shorter, because I think it would retain that attention more. I generally say when an album skips the 1 hour mark, the 60-minute mark, it's a bit too much at certain stages. But yet again, this album is that good that you can go through the 100 minutes and it will not feel, at least to myself, like it is becoming boring. But there are some standout tracks and some other tracks which are a bit more average. Also, this album has one of the best productions on any Manilla Road album. I really love the way that the production is made, the clarity of the music, yet still somewhat rough. Yes, I think this is the best production on any Manilla Road album. Album number 10, Atlantis Rising, released in 2001 with Iron Glory Records. Manilla Road during their career had a brief split between 1992 and 1994, and this was the comeback album in 2001. I think it was a very good comeback. It is the first record that has Hal Roddy on vocals. Brian Patrick, known as Hal Roddy, was the roadie with Manilla Road, who then at a certain point in time became a full-fledged member of the band. Has a bit of a more trashy sound, and that's why I said in previous album that it was a return to a more epic sound. This is epic as well, but the sound here is a bit more trashy. Also, production could be a bit better. Sometimes the instruments are not so clear in the mix. But it has some fantastic tracks like Sea Witch, the self-titled track Atlantis Rising, and the track March of the Gods, which has a very catchy riff to it. So all in all, this is a very good album as well. But obviously All of these albums are good, and that's the biggest achievement of Manilla Road in their career. Album number 9 is Out of the Abyss, released in 1988 with Leviathan Records. If Atlantis Rising was a bit trashy, this album is kind of outright thrash metal album. I have always loved this record. The riffs are very sharp and crunchy. It has some of the most relentless drumming by Randy Fox. Just listen to some of the best tracks such as Black Cauldron, Slaughterhouse and Out of the Abyss. You can get the feel from those tracks of how good this album is quite immediately. But all tracks in here bring forth that feel of constant headbanging, fists up in the air, and it's impressive how a band like Manilla Road, who have built their reputation on being an epic metal band, can get a sound like this, which is very thrash metal, and still create an album which is this good. Now we're reaching a point with the albums which I have to admit the differences between them are very minimal, if any. So it was really difficult for me to categorize these next 8 albums. So don't give that much of a particular attention to the ranking, but the albums here are that good that it's difficult for me to rank, but obviously I had to do it for the purpose of this video. Album number 8, Courts of Chaos, released in 1990 by Black Draken Records. The tracks on here are amazing, almost all of the tracks, with the exception of a few which are a bit so and so. That is what makes me put this album as number 8 and not further up the list. Also, I think the drums were triggered on this album, which is, as far as I know, is the only album with triggered drums. So that is a bit of a negative aspect, but tracks like Dig Me No Grave and Vlad the Impaler are exceptional tracks. There's also a Blood Rock covered, which is okay, although it feels a bit odd on this album, but I don't mind it. But the best track on here is The Book of Skelos, an epic track, one of the classic tracks by Manilla Road in general. Also love the artwork on this one. It reminds me a lot of one of my childhood heroes, which is He-Man, kind of the grey skull castle designed on there. I love it so much that I have framed the poster in this album on my wall, so it reminds me every time of my childhood as well, apart from reminding me of the great Manilla Road. Next in line is album number 7, which is Spiral Castle, released in 2002 with I In Glory Records. Possibly the most underrated Manilla Road album. It is not so mentioned as much as the other great or landmark albums of the band, but I feel this album is one of the heaviest, if not the heaviest album by Manilla Road, and it also holds kind of a menacing feel. You will also find some of the best Manilla Road solos on here, guitar solos. The title track is so good, and that riff on the track Shadow is unbelievable. So catchy. Also, there is a kind of a Middle Eastern feel on this record, which I really like. And you can listen to this kind of Middle Eastern vibe, especially on the track Merchants of Death. So, needless to say, a very consistent album from start to finish. It's one of the albums that I listen very frequently from Manilla Road's catalogue. Album number 6, Gates of Fire, released in 2005 with Battle Cry Records. It is a very ambitious album, incorporating 3 concepts in one album, and these 3 concepts can be seen on the cover artwork depicting the 3 themes included on this album. It is one of the longest albums as well, but it has the ability to remain consistent throughout, to not be a boring album after a while. So again, that is an indication of great songwriting and composition of the tracks. The opener, Riddle of Steel, has become one of Manilla Road's classic tracks. There's still a bit of a trashy feel on this album as well, example on the track When Giants Fall, but there are also a number of epic tracks, longer tracks, 10 plus minutes, and if I had to choose my favorite of those from here, it would be The Fall of Iliam. I just love that track. It's one of my favorite tracks ever from Manilla Road. Entering now the realm of total brilliance, total epic metal brilliance. Album number 5, Voyager, released in 2008 with My Graveyard Productions. I could live listening over and over again to the opening track on this record, which is the intro Tomb of the Serpent King, and the following track, Butchers of the Sea. It is so good. And if someone told me you have to listen to this track over and over again for the rest of your life, I wouldn't be unhappy one bit. It just exemplifies the greatness of heavy metal. This album is, I can describe as a total riff fest. It gets almost brutal at times, the vibe on here. That riff on the track Frost and Fire, the synth intro on the track Blood Eagle, the beautiful acoustic on Tree of Life, and these are only the first 4 tracks, and the rest of the album is equally as good, so you can imagine how good this album is. And being one of the latest albums released by Manilla Road, and to be able for them to capture the greatness of the early Manilla Road albums and producing something like this, I mean, it's mind-blowing. Get this album as soon as possible if you don't have it, or just remain a poser for your entire life. I hope I made my point on how good this album is. Album number 4, The Deluge, released in 1986 with Black Dragon Records. Another incredible album. It encompasses all that is great about Manilla Road, the quadruple shot of Divine Victims, Hammer of the Witches, Morbid Tabernacle, Isle of the Dead is one of the peak points in the whole discography of Manilla Road, and I even dare to say of heavy metal in general. I think that would be enough to explain how good this album is, and the rest of the tracks, needless to say, are exceptional, all very well above average, ranging from very good to masterpieces of tracks. There's no denying that this is one of the best Manilla Road albums ever, and even with regards to heavy metal in general. A truly essential album. Album number 3 is Open the Gates, released in 1984 by Black Dragon Records. I will make things very simple with regards to this album and mention only one track, which is The Ninth Wave. This track alone destroys 99% of anything that has ever been categorized as heavy metal. But if that wasn't enough, up to the aid come tracks like The Fire of Mars, Astronomica, and Witch's Brew, and all of those together really make this again another highlight in the history of heavy metal. The epicness on this album is almost unparalleled. One word for this album: amazing. Album number 2, Crystal Logic, released in 1983 with Roadster Records. One of epicmetal's landmark albums, released just a few months after the debut album by Manowar, Battle Hymns. It also marked the switch between that space rock sound from Manilla Road to the epic metal sound so synonymous with this band. A host of classic tracks on here: The Riddle Master, Veils of Negative Existence, and 2 of the most famous Manilla Road tracks ever in Crystal Logic and Necropolis. They used to be a constant in their set lists at live gigs. But the true masterpiece on this album is the track Dreams of Eshkaton, a 10-minute track which is the equivalent of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata or Mozart's Requiem. That is classical music, and this is truly classic heavy metal, which will stand the test of ages and will remain there for future generations and will be appreciated by those who really understand the true soul and power of heavy metal. So we have arrived to the album number 1, and by now you probably understood which album it is, and it is the album Mystification, released in 1987 with Roadster Records. Perfection right here. I don't know how I'm going to kind of explain what this album really means to me. All of these albums really, especially the first 7-8 albums, are for me exceptional albums. This album maybe lacks a bit on the epic side, but the tracks on here are exceptional, one after the other, heavy, menacing as well to a certain extent. And in unison with the title of the album, there's a mystical feel on this record, and maybe that is why I really love this album a bit more than the rest, because I love music that gives me that obscure feel, that mystical, that kind of witchcraft feel to a certain extent. And I don't know what other adjectives I can use to explain this feeling, but anyway, mystical surely fits the purpose here. I think this is the peak of Manilla Road. The band feels so confident on this record. It gives me that feel that they are really feeling this album and going through it with a certain confidence. You'll find mid-tempo to very fast tracks on this record. The feel is relentless from one track to the other, as I said. I really cannot mention any track in particular on this album because I feel if I mention one or two or three, I will be making a disservice to the other tracks on this record. I just cannot choose one or two or three tracks. Basically, it's the whole album that is perfect from start to finish. So those are my choices with regards to ranking Manilla Road's albums. When you are ranking the albums of one of your all-time favorite bands, it's quite a headache, and ranking 18 of them is much more than that. But I wanted to do this because I want to share the word of the band, share the word of Mark Shelton, the rest of the band members throughout the years. I would like to mention also the other main drummer with this band, apart from Randy Fox, which I mentioned already, which is Rick Fisher, which was one of the first drummers of Manilla Road, which helped in making albums such as Invasion, Metal, and Mark of the Beast and Crystal Logic. His contribution on there is equally as important. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me, what your choices would be. That is why we make, as I always say, these videos, to create a discussion and speak about our favorite bands, our favorite subgenres, and all in all, our favorite genre of music, which is heavy metal. Before I close, may I remind you to subscribe to this channel if you like our content, share this episode and our videos on social media and your friends. Nothing more to add. I hope everyone is taking care of himself in these difficult times. Stay safe and metal on. Until then, up the hammers.